We think we know the story. Elvis Presley, the king, a god on stage, a mess in private. The story goes he got fat, ate cheeseburgers, and took too many pills. A simple, sad story of rock and roll excess. But what if that's not the real story? What if the pills weren't just for kicks? What if his weight gain wasn't just about food? And what if the seeds of his death were planted before he was even born? The truth about Elvis's health is stranger than the myths. It's a story of hidden genetic flaws, freak accidents, chronic pain, and a body at war with itself. It's a medical mystery that's only now being pieced together decades after his death. The clues were there all along, in his stumbling on stage, in his bloated face, in his desperate search for sleep. We just saw the caricature, not the sick man underneath. What if a fall in a Las Vegas hotel bathroom set him on a path to ruin? Was his famous diet a cry for help, not a sign of gluttony? And could a single missing protein explain almost everything? Get ready to forget the story you think you know. Number 17, how many pills was he really taking? Let's start with the part of the story everyone thinks they know. The drugs. But the reality is more shocking than the legend. It wasn't about a handful of pills here and there. It was an overwhelming, organized, daily flood of pharmaceuticals. The day he died, August 16th, 1977, his toxicology report was a pharmacy's inventory list. They found 10 different prescription drugs in his system in significant quantities. Ecodine, ethinomate, methaqualone, or Quaaludes, a handful of barbiturates like amytal, nembutal, and carbitol. Then there were the benzodiazepines, Valium and Valmeed, and of course the painkiller Dilaudid. But that was just one day, a snapshot of the end. To understand the scale, you have to look at the patterns. In the 7.5 months leading up to his death, from January 1st to August 15th, 1977, his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, known as Dr. Nick, had prescribed him over 10,000 doses of sedatives, amphetamines, and narcotics. Let that sink in. That's an average of more than 40 pills every single day. This wasn't a secret stash, this was a medical operation. Dr. Nick traveled with Elvis. He had a system. He would prepare small packets of pills for Elvis to take at specific times throughout the day and night. One packet for getting up, one for after breakfast, one for before a show, another for after a show. And several packets designed to knock him out so he could sleep. The members of Elvis's entourage, the Memphis Mafia, would often be the ones to hand him these packets. They saw it happen day after day. The variety of drugs was staggering. He took uppers to get enough energy to perform. He took downers to calm down after the adrenaline of a show. He took painkillers for a body that was in constant agony. He took sleeping pills for chronic, debilitating insomnia. He took laxatives for a bowel system that had all but shut down. It was a chemical balancing act, and every pill he took to solve one problem created or worsened another. The uppers made it impossible to sleep naturally. The downers and painkillers made his constipation catastrophic. It was a vicious cycle, a chemical prison he and his doctor had built. In the 1981 trial where Dr. Nick was charged with overprescribing, the sheer volume of prescriptions was laid bare. The defense argued that Dr. Nick was trying to control a hopeless addict's intake, sometimes using placebos to trick Elvis into thinking he was getting his fix. But the prosecution painted a picture of a doctor who was either a willing enabler or was simply overwhelmed by his celebrity patient. The jury acquitted Dr. Nick, but the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners later revoked his license permanently in 1995 for his practices. The numbers speak for themselves. This wasn't just a rock star taking a few pills to party. This was a man systematically saturating his body with a cocktail of powerful drugs, day in and day out, just to get through his life. But here is the real question that changes everything. Why did he need them in the first place? Was this truly just the weakness of an addict, or was he self-medicating for a collection of painful, terrifying, and undiagnosed medical conditions? What if the 10,000 pills were a symptom, not the disease itself? And what happens to a human body when it's forced to process that much medication for that long? Could the sheer volume of these drugs have caused new diseases to appear? Number 16, did a hotel room fall cause brain damage? An event that's often overlooked in the story of Elvis's decline happened in a Las Vegas hotel room in 1967. It might be one of the most important puzzle pieces. He was in his hotel suite, tripped over a television cord, and fell headfirst into the porcelain bathtub. He was knocked out cold. The impact was so severe that some accounts say it cracked the tub. He was left with what was described at the time as a serious concussion. This was not a minor bump on the head. In the days and weeks that followed, something changed in him. People close to him, like his wife Priscilla, noted a shift in his personality. He became more erratic, his moods more unpredictable. He complained of headaches and a strange feeling of being disconnected. This is classic post-concussion syndrome. But in the 1960s, the long-term effects of traumatic brain injuries weren't well understood. He was told to rest, and then he went back to work. But the body remembers. A severe head trauma can trigger a cascade of problems. One of the leading theories, explored by author Sally Hodel in her book Elvis Destined to Die Young, is that this injury may have triggered a dormant autoimmune disorder. An autoimmune disease is when the body's own immune system gets confused and starts attacking healthy tissue. It can attack joints, organs, and even the brain. A major physical trauma, like a severe concussion, can be the shock that awakens this kind of condition. Suddenly, some of his later health complaints start to make more sense. He began suffering from vertigo, a debilitating dizziness that would make him stumble on stage. He had chronic pain all over his body. He had vision problems, leading to his diagnosis of glaucoma. He had digestive issues. All of these can be symptoms of various autoimmune diseases like lupus. The fall in the bathtub may have been the starting gun for a decade-long internal war. Think about it. Before the fall, he was still in his prime, making movies, recording music. He was healthy. After the fall, the slow, steady decline began. The reliance on painkillers wasn't just for a bad back from dancing anymore. It might have been for a body that was systematically attacking itself, causing widespread inflammation and pain that doctors couldn't explain. The erratic behavior we blame on drugs might have been exacerbated or even caused by brain inflammation following the injury. He wasn't just losing it. His brain may have been physically injured and then under attack from his own immune system. We see this today with athletes in contact sports. We understand that multiple concussions can lead to CTE, or chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease with symptoms like memory loss, confusion, and personality changes. While Elvis didn't have a career of repeated head trauma, a single severe injury can have lifelong consequences. The man who emerged from that hotel bathroom was not the same man who went in. So, what if the fall wasn't just a minor accident, but the inciting incident of his physical collapse? How much of the crazy Elvis behavior of the 1970s was actually the result of an untreated brain injury? And could modern medicine have diagnosed an autoimmune response back then, potentially changing the entire course of his final years? Number 15, what was wrong with his eyes? In the 1970s, Elvis was rarely seen in public without his signature oversized sunglasses. It was part of his iconic look. But it wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a medical necessity. He was suffering from excruciating eye pain. In 1970, he was diagnosed with secondary glaucoma in both eyes. Glaucoma is a condition that increases the pressure inside the eyeball, known as intraocular pressure. This pressure can damage the optic nerve, which connects the eye to the brain. If left untreated, it leads to irreversible blindness. Secondary glaucoma means it was caused by another medical condition or injury, not just genetics or age. For Elvis, the pain was intense. Bright lights, especially the powerful stage lights he performed under, were agonizing. This is why he wore the dark glasses, even indoors. The condition also caused his vision to blur and deteriorate. He was a man who relied on reading lyrics and interacting with his band on stage, and now his own eyes were failing him. The diagnosis itself points to a bigger problem. Why would a man in his mid-30s develop glaucoma? It's often linked to other systemic health issues. One common cause is long-term use of corticosteroids. While we don't have definitive records of him taking steroids for inflammation, it's possible. Another, more compelling link is to autoimmune disorders. Inflammation is a key feature of autoimmune diseases, and that inflammation can occur anywhere in the body, including the eyes, leading to increased pressure. This ties back to the theory that he was suffering from a body-wide inflammatory disease, possibly triggered by his 1967 head injury. The treatment for glaucoma at the time often involved powerful medications. He was likely prescribed eye drops to lower the pressure, but the pain itself became another reason to take painkillers. Think of the cycle. His underlying disease causes eye pain. The pain makes it hard to perform. He takes painkillers to get through the show. The painkillers have side effects that worsen his other conditions. It's a web of interconnected symptoms and treatments, and he was caught in the middle. His eye problems were a constant daily torment. Friends and band members recalled him complaining about the pain, about his vision blurring, about the difficulty of dealing with the bright lights of fame, which were now a source of physical torture. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a man in his 30s, afraid of going blind, dealing with a pain so severe he had to hide his eyes from the world. The sunglasses weren't cool, they were a shield. How much did the fear of blindness contribute to his mental state and his reliance on other drugs to cope? Was the glaucoma a standalone issue, or was it like the chronic pain and vertigo? Just one more symptom of a larger, unidentified systemic disease raging through his body. And if doctors had seen the glaucoma not as an eye problem, but as a clue to a body-wide illness, could they have intervened differently? Number 14, why couldn't he sleep? One of Elvis's most lifelong struggles was his inability to sleep. From his early days of fame, he was a chronic insomniac. He called it the blackness. This wasn't just a case of being too wired after a show. This was a profound, recurring inability to shut his brain off and get restorative rest. His life became a desperate, decades-long quest for sleep. This quest is what led him down the path of prescription drug abuse. It started innocently enough, with over-the-counter sleep aids. But as his tolerance grew, he sought out stronger and stronger medications. By the 1970s, his bedtime ritual was a chemical assault designed to force his body into unconsciousness. He would take a cocktail of powerful barbiturates and sedatives, but the sleep they induced wasn't natural. It was a heavy drugged stupor that often left him groggy, confused, and even more exhausted the next day. This, in turn, led him to take amphetamines and stimulants in the morning to be able to function, creating a brutal chemical seesaw. The people around him became accustomed to his bizarre sleep schedule. He was a nocturnal creature, staying up all night watching TV, reading, or talking, and then trying to sleep all day. Graceland's windows were blacked out to create a perpetual night. His bedroom was kept at a frigidly cold temperature, another one of his attempts to trick his body into sleeping. But why was his insomnia so severe? It was likely caused by a combination of factors. The adrenaline of performing certainly played a role. The constant pressure of fame was another. But there was probably a physiological component as well. Chronic pain is a major cause of insomnia. It's hard to sleep when your body hurts. His various ailments, from his back to his eyes to his digestive system, were likely sending pain signals to his brain all night long. Furthermore, some of the underlying conditions we now suspect he had can directly interfere with sleep. Autoimmune disorders are frequently linked with sleep disturbances and fatigue. The toxins building up in his system from his failing colon and liver could also have had a neurological effect, disrupting his natural sleep-wake cycles. He wasn't just a rock star who couldn't wind down. He was a sick man whose body and brain chemistry were profoundly out of balance. The tragedy is that the cure was a poison. The sleeping pills he took are known to suppress REM sleep, the most restorative phase of the sleep cycle. So even when he was unconscious for 8 or 10 hours, he wasn't getting the quality of rest his body desperately needed to heal. He was waking up just as tired, if not more so, than when he went to bed. This chronic sleep deprivation would have worsened every single one of his other health problems. It impairs judgment, weakens the immune system, increases inflammation, and contributes to weight gain. His insomnia wasn't just a side effect of his lifestyle, it was a central engine of his physical decline. Could his insomnia have been an early neurological symptom of his body's systemic breakdown? How much of his dependency on other drugs was driven by the simple human need for a good night's sleep? And if a doctor today could have put him in a modern sleep lab, what would they have discovered about what was truly happening in his brain during those long, dark nights? Well, number 13 was his colon, really twice the normal length. This is one of the most shocking and least discussed facts about Elvis's health, and it was only discovered after he died. During his autopsy, the pathologists were stunned by the condition of his large intestine. The normal colon is about 4 to 5 feet long. Elvis's was estimated to be 8 to 9 feet long. It was also severely distended, up to 5 or 6 inches in diameter in some places, where it should have been 2. The medical term for this is megacolon. It's a condition where the colon loses its muscle tone and ability to contract and move waste material through the digestive tract. This leads to a massive chronic impaction. His autopsy revealed he had stool in his colon that was likely 4 or 5 months old. It had become hard and chalky. This condition would have caused him unimaginable, constant suffering. He would have been in a state of perpetual severe constipation. This explains his documented complaints about his bowels and his heavy use of laxatives. It would have caused extreme bloating, abdominal pain, and cramping. Much of the weight gain people saw in his later years, the famous fat Elvis belly, was likely not just fat. It was a horribly diseased, impacted, and enlarged organ. The consequences of megacolon go beyond physical discomfort. When waste sits in the colon for that long, the body begins to reabsorb toxins back into the bloodstream. This is called autointoxication. This toxic overload can cause a huge range of symptoms: fatigue, brain fog, irritability, mood swings, skin problems, and a weakened immune system. It puts immense strain on the liver, which has to work overtime to filter these poisons. Didn't sound familiar? These are all things Elvis was experiencing in his final years. His lethargy, his erratic behavior, his poor complexion, it could all be traced back in part to a colon that was poisoning him from the inside out. What caused it? It's a chicken and egg situation. The condition may have had a congenital or hereditary component, but it was made catastrophically worse by his prescription drug use. Opioid painkillers, which he took in large quantities, are notorious for causing severe constipation. They paralyze the muscles of the gut. So he was taking painkillers for his chronic pain. And those very pills were exacerbating the megacolon, which in turn was causing more pain and releasing toxins that made him feel sick, leading him to take more pills. It was a death spiral centered in his digestive system. Reportedly, doctors had discovered the problem before his death and recommended a colostomy, a surgical procedure to remove the diseased part of the colon. This would have meant wearing a colostomy bag for a man whose entire identity was tied to his physical image and his status as a sex symbol. This was apparently a line he would not cross. His vanity, or perhaps his fear of the surgery, led him to refuse the treatment that might have saved his life, or at least dramatically improved its quality. How long had he been living with this condition before it was discovered? Could this single, horrific physical problem be the key that explains his reclusive behavior and seeming laziness in his final year? And how much of the personality we associate with the late Elvis was actually a man being slowly poisoned by his own body? Number 12. Why did he keep stumbling on stage? In his final years, fans and critics noted that Elvis's stage performances could be erratic. Sometimes he was brilliant, but other times he seemed weak, confused, and unsteady on his feet. He would stumble, grab onto the microphone stand for support, or slur his words. The easy explanation was that he was high on prescription drugs, and while the drugs certainly played a major role, there was another specific medical condition contributing to his instability: vertigo. Elvis was diagnosed with Meniere's disease, a disorder of the inner ear. The inner ear is responsible for both hearing and balance. Meniere's disease causes a fluid buildup in the inner ear, leading to sudden, severe attacks of vertigo, a sensation where the world feels like it's spinning violently. These attacks can also cause fluctuating hearing loss, tinnitus, ringing in the ears, and a feeling of fullness or pressure in the ear. Imagine being on stage in front of 20,000 people under blindingly hot lights and suddenly having an attack of Meniere's. The floor would seem to tilt, the lights would spin, nausea would overwhelm you. It would be terrifying and completely disorienting. This is what Elvis was dealing with. Some of the times he appeared drunk or drugged on stage, he may have been in the middle of a vertigo attack, desperately trying to keep his balance and get through the show. His friend and bodyguard, Sonny West, described an incident where Elvis was in his bedroom and suddenly couldn't stand up. He was crawling on the floor because the vertigo was so severe. This wasn't just a minor dizziness. It was a crippling, unpredictable neurological assault. Like his glaucoma, Meniere's disease is often linked to underlying systemic issues. It can be triggered by head trauma, which points back to his 1967 bathtub fall. It is also strongly associated with autoimmune disorders and systemic inflammation. His body's internal war could have been attacking the delicate structures of his inner ear. The high-sodium diet he favored, full of salty, fatty foods, would have also made the fluid retention and pressure of Meniere's disease worse. This condition adds another layer to his suffering and his reliance on medication. There are drugs to manage Meniere's, like diuretics to reduce fluid retention and anti-nausea medications. These would have been added to his already massive pill regimen, and the sheer anxiety of not knowing when an attack would strike would have taken a huge psychological toll, likely increasing his use of sedatives to calm his nerves before performance. The image of Elvis stumbling on stage is one of the saddest of his later career. We saw it as a failure, a sign of a man who had lost control, but it may have been the sign of a man fighting a silent, invisible battle against his own sense of balance, trying to stay upright while the world spun beneath his feet. Was his Meniere's disease a direct result of his head injury or another symptom of a body-wide autoimmune attack? How many concerts did he have to cancel or cut short, not because he was high, but because he was physically incapable of standing up? And could the constant ringing in his ears have contributed to his reclusiveness and desire to isolate himself from the noise of the world? Well, number 11, was his body attacking itself? As we look at all these separate health problems and the glaucoma, the vertigo, the chronic pain, the digestive issues, the skin problems, a pattern begins to emerge. Many of these are classic symptoms of a systemic autoimmune disease. This is the theory that could tie almost everything together. An autoimmune disease is a condition where the body's immune system, which is supposed to fight off invaders like bacteria and viruses, mistakenly identifies its own healthy cells and tissues as foreign threats and attacks them. It's essentially a state of friendly fire, a civil war inside the body. This attack causes chronic inflammation, which can affect any part of the body. If it attacks the joints, you get rheumatoid arthritis. If it attacks the skin, you get psoriasis or lupus. If it attacks the nervous system, you get multiple sclerosis. There are over 80 different types of autoimmune diseases, and they often present with a confusing and overlapping array of symptoms. For Elvis, the evidence is compelling: his chronic unexplained pain all over his body, his fatigue, his skin rashes, his iritis and glaucoma inflammation of the eye, his Meniere's disease inflammation of the inner ear, his digestive problems, which could be related to an autoimmune attack on the gut. All of these point toward a body in a state of constant, widespread inflammation. The likely trigger, as mentioned before, was the severe head trauma he sustained in 1967. Major physical trauma is a known trigger for activating latent autoimmune conditions in people who are genetically predisposed. It's possible Elvis carried the genes for an autoimmune disease and they lay dormant until that fall. The shock to his system kick-started the immune response and it never shut off. This would explain why doctors in the 1970s had so much trouble diagnosing him. They were treating a collection of separate symptoms. Dr. Nick and others were giving him pills for his eyes, pills for his dizziness, pills for his stomach, and painkillers for his body. They were playing whack-a-mole with the symptoms, but no one seemed to identify the single underlying cause, a malfunctioning immune system. The field of immunology was still developing, and the connections between these disparate symptoms were not as well understood as they are today. If he did have an autoimmune disease like lupus, which can affect the brain, it could also help explain some of his paranoia, mood swings, and cognitive difficulties in his later years. He wasn't just a strung-out rock star. He could have been suffering from neurological inflammation. The tragedy of an autoimmune disease is that you look fine on the outside, but you feel like you are falling apart on the inside. It's an invisible illness, and this would have been profoundly isolating for Elvis. People saw the weight gain and the sluggishness and judged him for it, not realizing it was the result of a relentless disease. This theory reframes his entire story. He wasn't weak-willed, he was chronically and systemically ill. He wasn't just abusing drugs for pleasure, he was desperately trying to medicate the pain and confusion of a body that had turned on itself. What specific autoimmune disease did he have? We may never know for sure without DNA evidence. Could a proper diagnosis and treatment with anti-inflammatory drugs or immunosuppressants in the early 1970s have saved him? And how much of his deep depression was a psychological reaction to the pain and frustration of living with a mysterious, debilitating, and invisible illness? Number 10, why was his liver failing? The liver is the body's primary filter. It processes everything you ingest, from food to alcohol to medication, and detoxifies the blood. By the mid-1970s, Elvis's liver was in serious trouble. It was enlarged and showed signs of damage. This is not surprising given the circumstances, but the causes were likely more complex than just one thing. The first and most obvious culprit was the sheer volume of prescription drugs he was taking. Processing tens of thousands of doses of powerful narcotics, sedatives, and amphetamines puts an incredible strain on the liver. The organ has to work around the clock to break down these chemicals. Over time, this constant workload can lead to inflammation, hepatitis, and damage to liver cells. Some drugs are particularly toxic to the liver, and he was taking a cocktail of them every single day for years. The second major factor was his diet. Elvis was famous for his love of rich, fatty, and high-calorie foods, like the legendary Fool's Gold loaf, a hollowed-out loaf of bread filled with a pound of bacon, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of grape jelly. This kind of diet can lead to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. This is a condition where fat builds up in the liver, causing inflammation and damage, which can progress to cirrhosis, the same kind of scarring caused by alcoholism, even in someone who doesn't drink heavily. Elvis was known to drink very little alcohol, so his liver damage was almost certainly from other causes. The third, and perhaps most insidious, factor was his untreated megacolon. As his diseased colon failed to remove waste, toxins were being continuously reabsorbed into his bloodstream. This toxic blood then flowed directly to the liver, which had to try and filter out these poisons. This put the liver under a double assault. It was dealing with the drugs he was intentionally ingesting and the toxins his own body was unintentionally producing. It was a war on two fronts, and the liver was losing. A damaged liver doesn't work efficiently. This would have contributed to his overall feeling of sickness, fatigue, and lethargy. It can also cause bloating and fluid retention, which would have added to his puffy appearance. Furthermore, a failing liver can't process medications properly. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. The drugs damage the liver, and the damaged liver is less able to clear the drugs from the body. This means the drugs stay in his system longer and at higher concentrations, making them more potent and more dangerous and causing even more liver damage. This might explain why his tolerance seemed to decrease in the end, and why doses that he could once handle became lethal. His liver was a silent victim of his lifestyle, his prescriptions, and his other diseases. It was a vital organ being systematically destroyed from multiple angles. The state of his liver was yet another clear sign that his entire system was in a state of catastrophic failure. Could the combination of drugs, diet, and toxins have caused a unique form of liver damage that doctors at the time didn't recognize? How close was he to complete liver failure at the time of his death? And if his liver had been functioning properly, could it have processed the final dose of drugs he took, potentially saving his life on that last day? Number 9, what was killing him silently? Amidst all the dramatic and visible health problems, Elvis was also suffering from a common but deadly condition, hypertension, or high blood pressure. At the time of his death, his blood pressure was reportedly measured at 160/100, which is considered stage 2 hypertension. This was a man in his early 40s with the blood pressure of a much older, sicker person. High blood pressure is often called the silent killer because it can have no symptoms while it is causing serious damage to the body. It forces the heart to work much harder to pump blood, which can cause the heart muscle to thicken and weaken over time. It also damages the delicate lining of the arteries, making them more susceptible to atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque that can lead to heart attacks and strokes. Several factors contributed to Elvis's severe hypertension. His diet, high in salt and fat, was a major contributor. His lack of consistent healthy exercise was another. His weight gain put additional strain on his entire cardiovascular system. And the prescription drugs he took could also have played a role. Some stimulants in particular can raise blood pressure. But there may have been another, less obvious cause. A 2006 study published in the journal Circulation by researchers at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center found a strong link between alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, a genetic disorder we now know Elvis had, and an increased risk for arterial damage and aneurysms. His own genetic makeup may have predisposed him to vascular problems and hypertension. This high blood pressure was a ticking time bomb inside him. It was putting immense, constant strain on his already diseased heart. His autopsy showed that his heart was significantly enlarged, about twice the normal size. This condition, cardiomyopathy, was a direct result of the heart having to pump against such high pressure for so long. His arteries, especially the coronary arteries that supply blood to the heart itself, were also found to be severely diseased. This makes the official cause of death, cardiac arrest, make much more sense. He had a perfect storm of risk factors for a major cardiac event: a genetically weakened heart, enlarged from overwork due to high blood pressure, with clogged arteries, in a body full of drugs that could cause an arrhythmia at any moment. Dr. Nick was aware of the high blood pressure and had reportedly been trying to treat it, but likely with limited success given Elvis's lifestyle and other complex health issues. The hypertension was another piece of the puzzle that was being treated in isolation rather than as part of a systemic breakdown. It wasn't just high blood pressure. It was a critical symptom of a body whose entire circulatory system was under immense stress and approaching a breaking point. How long had he been living with dangerously high blood pressure before it was diagnosed? Did any of the doctors realize the extreme danger it posed when combined with his other conditions and his drug regimen? And was the final fatal event a heart attack caused by a blockage or a cardiac arrhythmia caused by the combination of a diseased heart and a chemical shock to his system? Number 8. Did the ghost of his twin brother haunt his health? To understand Elvis's health, you have to go back to the very beginning, to the day he was born, January 8th, 1935. Elvis was a twin. His brother Jesse Garen Presley was delivered 35 minutes before him, stillborn. And Elvis grew up as a lone twin, forever connected to a sibling he never knew. This primal loss cast a long shadow over his entire life and likely had a profound impact on his physical and mental health. His mother, Gladys, reportedly told him that when one twin dies, the one that lives gets the strength of both. This placed a huge psychological burden on him. He felt he had to live for two people. This could have fueled his incredible drive to succeed, but it also may have created a deep underlying sense of guilt and incompleteness. This is known as survivor's guilt, and it can manifest in self-destructive behaviors. On some subconscious level, a person might feel they don't deserve their life when their sibling didn't get one, leading them to take risks with their own health. Elvis often spoke to his brother. He would visit his grave. He felt his presence throughout his life. This was not just a passing thought, it was a core part of his identity. This deep spiritual and psychological connection to his lost twin could have created a chronic state of emotional stress. And we know that chronic stress has devastating effects on the body. It raises cortisol levels, increases inflammation, suppresses the immune system, and contributes to high blood pressure and heart disease. The trauma wasn't just Elvis's, it was his mother's. Gladys was deeply protective of her surviving son. Her own anxieties about his health and safety were transferred to him. This environment, while loving, may have fostered a certain fragility and a reliance on his mother for comfort that later transferred to other figures, like his doctors and the members of his entourage, who enabled his self-destructive habits. Some psychologists have theorized that his overeating and drug abuse were, in part, an attempt to feed or numb the empty space inside him left by his twin. It was a way of coping with a profound pre-verbal loneliness. When his mother died in 1958, he lost his primary emotional anchor, and his health problems and reliance on prescription drugs began to escalate. He was trying to fill a double void, the one left by his brother and the one left by his mother. This isn't a mystical theory. It's about the very real impact of early trauma and lifelong grief on a person's physical body. The mind and body are not separate. His psychological pain was a constant stressor that undoubtedly weakened his physical resilience and made him more susceptible to the other diseases that were attacking his body. The fight for his life wasn't just against physical ailments, it was also against the ghosts of his past. Could his survivor's guilt have directly led to his self-destructive health choices? How did the loss of his mother, the only other person who truly understood the weight of Jesse's death, accelerate his physical decline? And is it possible that a part of him felt he was destined to join his brother, leading him to subconsciously ignore the warnings his body was giving him? Number 7, were his teeth rotting? One of the less glamorous but critically important aspects of Elvis's declining health was the terrible state of his teeth. While he had a world-famous smile, behind the scenes he was dealing with chronic and severe dental problems. He had multiple crowns, fillings, and issues with receding gums, but the biggest problem was chronic infection. Poor dental health is not just a cosmetic issue, the mouth is a gateway to the rest of the body. A chronic infection in the gums, or at the root of a tooth, known as an abscess, is a breeding ground for bacteria. These bacteria don't just stay in the mouth. They can enter the bloodstream and travel throughout the body, a condition known as bacteremia. Once in the bloodstream, these bacteria can cause inflammation anywhere they go. They can attach to the lining of the arteries, contributing to the plaque buildup of atherosclerosis and increasing the risk of heart attack and stroke. They can worsen inflammation in the joints and organs, which would have been especially dangerous for Elvis if he was already suffering from an autoimmune disease. A constant low-grade infection puts the immune system on high alert, which can exacerbate an already overactive autoimmune response. His diet, high in sugar, would have contributed to tooth decay. But some of the medications he was taking, particularly barbiturates, can cause dry mouth as a side effect. Saliva is crucial for washing away food particles and neutralizing acids that cause decay. A chronically dry mouth creates a perfect environment for bacteria to thrive. So, like everything else, it was a vicious cycle. His lifestyle and medications contributed to his dental problems, and his dental problems created a source of chronic infection and inflammation that worsened his other systemic diseases. He was known to have a fear of dentists, which may have led him to postpone treatment. But he was also taking powerful painkillers, which would have masked the pain of his dental issues, allowing the underlying infections to fester and spread without him being fully aware of the severity. His personal physician, Dr. Nick, was reportedly concerned about his dental health and believed it was a contributing factor to his overall sickness. A source of chronic infection can cause fever, fatigue, and a general feeling of being unwell, all of which Elvis experienced. It's another hidden source of the toxic load his body was under. We focus on the prescription drugs, but the poisons being generated inside his own mouth may have been just as damaging. How many of his health complaints, like fatigue and body aches, were actually symptoms of a systemic infection originating in his mouth? Did his doctors fully appreciate the link between oral health and cardiovascular and autoimmune diseases back in the 1970s? And could a comprehensive dental intervention have significantly reduced the inflammatory load on his body and improved his overall health? Number 6, did he stop breathing in his sleep? We've talked about Elvis's chronic insomnia, but the quality of the sleep he did get was likely abysmal, and not just because of the drugs. It's highly probable that Elvis suffered from severe, untreated obstructive sleep apnea (OSA). This is a condition where the airway repeatedly collapses or becomes blocked during sleep, causing the person to stop breathing. These pauses in breathing, called apneas, can last from a few seconds to over a minute and can happen hundreds of times a night. When the brain senses the lack of oxygen, it sends a panic signal that briefly wakes the person up so they can gasp for air. Most of the time, the person doesn't remember these awakenings, but it completely shatters their sleep architecture, preventing them from ever reaching the deep restorative stages of sleep. Elvis was a prime candidate for sleep apnea. The biggest risk factor is excess weight, particularly around the neck. As he gained weight in the 1970s, this would have made him much more susceptible. His friends and girlfriends reported that he was a loud, violent snorer, which is the classic sign of a blocked airway. The effects of untreated sleep apnea are devastating. The chronic lack of oxygen puts immense strain on the cardiovascular system, leading to high blood pressure, heart attack, and stroke. It causes extreme daytime fatigue and sleepiness, cognitive impairment, brain fog, and irritability. Sound familiar? These are the exact symptoms that plagued Elvis in his final years. His lethargy wasn't just laziness, he was likely suffering from profound sleep deprivation on a physiological level. Now, add his prescription drug use to the mix. The sedatives and narcotics he took to get to sleep are central nervous system depressants. They relax all the muscles in the body, including the muscles in the throat that hold the airway open. For someone with sleep apnea, taking these drugs is like pouring gasoline on a fire. The drugs would have made his apneas longer, more frequent, and more severe, dropping his blood oxygen levels to dangerously low points throughout the night. The official finding of his death was cardiac arrest. It's very common for people with severe sleep apnea to have their fatal heart attack or arrhythmia during sleep, as the heart is under the most strain from the lack of oxygen. The final dose of drugs he took, on top of his underlying sleep apnea, could have relaxed his airway to the point of complete collapse, leading to a fatal drop in oxygen that triggered the cardiac event. Sleep apnea wasn't a well-understood or commonly diagnosed condition in the 1970s. The technology of sleep labs was in its infancy. No one would have thought to check for it. They just saw a man who was tired all the time and who snored loudly, but this unrecognized condition may have been a key driver of his hypertension and his heart disease, and it may have been the final mechanism of his death. Could Elvis's constant fatigue and need for stimulants have been almost entirely explained by a sleep disorder? How much more dangerous did his prescription drug cocktail become when combined with severe sleep apnea? And if he had been diagnosed and treated with a CPAP machine, which keeps the airway open, could it have reversed his hypertension and saved his heart? Number 5, how heavy was that jumpsuit? We think of Elvis on stage in the 70s as a god, a dazzling figure in a white, bejeweled jumpsuit. But we rarely consider the sheer physical brutality of his job. Those jumpsuits, which became increasingly elaborate, could weigh over 30 pounds. He was performing high-energy 90-minute shows, sometimes twice a day, under scorching theatrical lights, while wearing what was essentially a heavy, non-breathable blanket studded with metal and glass. The physical toll would have been immense. He would sweat profusely, losing huge amounts of fluids and electrolytes. This dehydration would have put a strain on his kidneys and his heart. The sheer physical exertion for a man who was not in good health would have been exhausting. He was trying to perform the same dynamic moves he did as a young man, but now in a body that was overweight, in chronic pain, and systemically ill. This physical stress was another driver of his prescription drug use. He needed uppers like dexedrine to get the energy to even walk out on stage. He needed powerful painkillers to numb his aching joints and back so he could do the karate kicks and lunges the audience expected. Then, after the show, drenched in sweat and with his adrenaline pumping, he needed powerful downers to calm down and sedatives to try and sleep. The job itself created the need for the chemical assistance that was destroying him. There was also the psychological pressure. He was Elvis Presley. He had to live up to the legend every single night. He was intensely aware of the criticism about his weight and his sometimes lethargic performances. This pressure to perform, to be the king, would have caused huge anxiety, which he also treated with medication. He was trapped, the performance was killing him, but the performance was all he had left. It was his identity, his body was breaking down, he had a bad back, he had a twisted ankle that never healed properly, he had the chronic pain from his potential autoimmune condition. Every show was an act of physical willpower, pushing a sick body far beyond its limits. We see the videos of him looking tired and bloated, and we judge him, but we're not seeing a man who let himself go. We're seeing a man who was refusing to stop working, even as his body was screaming at him to stop. He was a professional, and he was there to entertain his fans, even if it cost him his life. And in the end, it did. How many calories was he burning during a single performance, and how did this extreme exertion affect his already weakened heart? Did the constant cycle of sweating and rehydrating with unhealthy drinks contribute to his electrolyte imbalances, which can trigger cardiac arrhythmias? And was there a point where the physical act of performing became the single most dangerous activity in his life? Number 4, was his doctor a healer or an enabler? You cannot talk about Elvis's health without talking about Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick. He was Elvis's personal physician from 1967 until his death in 1977. Their relationship was incredibly complex, and Dr. Nick remains one of the most controversial figures in the story. Was he a caring doctor trying to manage an impossible patient, or a starstruck enabler who handed a drug addict the keys to the pharmacy? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Dr. Nick insisted until his own death that he always had Elvis's best interests at heart. He argued that Elvis was a master at manipulating doctors. If Dr. Nick didn't give him the pills he wanted, Elvis would just doctor shop until he found someone who would. He claimed his strategy was to control the supply, to know exactly what Elvis was taking, and to try and substitute placebos whenever he could to reduce the actual amount of drugs Elvis was consuming. He saw himself as trying to manage the lesser of two evils. The problem is the sheer volume of prescriptions. As we mentioned, over 10,000 doses in the last 7 months of his life. These weren't placebos. They were powerful, dangerous, and addictive medications. The prosecution in his 1981 trial argued that no responsible doctor would ever prescribe on that scale. They painted a picture of a man who got caught up in the celebrity lifestyle, who enjoyed the perks of being the king's personal doctor, and who lost his medical objectivity along the way. Dr. Nick was with Elvis constantly. He saw the physical decline. He knew about the glaucoma, the high blood pressure, the colon problems. He was treating the symptoms. But it's unclear if he ever put all the pieces together to see the larger picture of systemic disease. Or if he did, if he was powerless to get Elvis to listen. Elvis was a notoriously difficult patient. He believed he knew his own body and would often self-diagnose and demand specific treatments. To go against Elvis could mean being fired and losing access to the lavish lifestyle he provided. This is the classic dilemma of a concierge doctor to a major celebrity. The patient is also the boss. How do you enforce medical discipline on a man who can fire you at any moment? Dr. Nick was in an impossible position. However, as a medical professional, his first duty was to do no harm. And it's very difficult to argue that prescribing thousands of doses of narcotics and sedatives did no harm. The story of Dr. Nick is a cautionary tale about the seductive power of fame and the blurred lines between doctor, friend, and employee. He was acquitted of criminal charges, but his medical license was eventually revoked. He was the man who was supposed to be taking care of Elvis, and on his watch, Elvis died. Whether he was a well-intentioned failure or a willing accomplice, the result was the same. Did Dr. Nick ever truly try to force Elvis into a detox or rehab program? How much of Elvis's true medical picture did Dr. Nick understand? And how much was he simply guessing at? And if a different, more authoritative doctor had been in charge, one who was not financially dependent on Elvis, could the outcome have been different? Number 3 was his heart a ticking time bomb from birth. While Elvis's lifestyle and drug use put incredible strain on his heart, he may have been born with a heart that was already flawed. His autopsy revealed that he had significant cardiac disease, but recent research into his family's health history suggests a specific genetic condition, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy (HCM). HCM is a disease in which the heart muscle becomes abnormally thick. This thickened muscle can make it harder for the heart to pump blood. It can also disrupt the heart's electrical system, leading to dangerous and often fatal arrhythmias or irregular heartbeats. It is a leading cause of sudden cardiac death in young athletes who can seem perfectly healthy one moment and be gone the next. The evidence for this in Elvis's family is striking. His mother, Gladys, died at age 46. Her official cause of death was a heart attack. 3 of her brothers also died in their 40s from heart or lung-related issues. This pattern of early death on one side of the family is a huge red flag for a hereditary heart condition. Author Sally Hodell's research strongly points to HCM as the likely culprit running through the Smith family, Gladys's side. If Elvis inherited this gene, his heart was a ticking time bomb from the day he was born. The wall of his left ventricle would have been slowly but surely thickening throughout his life. This would have been happening silently with no symptoms for years. Then add in all the other factors. His severe high blood pressure would have forced this already compromised heart muscle to work even harder, causing it to thicken even more. This is a condition called cardiac hypertrophy, and his autopsy confirmed his heart was almost twice the normal size. His drug use, particularly stimulants, and the chaotic mix of uppers and downers would have put his heart's electrical system in a constant state of flux, dramatically increasing the risk of a fatal arrhythmia. This genetic theory changes the narrative completely. It means Elvis wasn't just a man who destroyed a healthy heart with a bad lifestyle. He was a man who likely had a congenitally diseased heart, and his lifestyle then pushed that fragile organ past its breaking point. His mother's early death should have been a warning, but in the 1950s and 60s, the understanding of genetic heart disease was minimal. No one would have made the connection. The final cardiac event on August 16, 1977, was likely an arrhythmia. The combination of the codeine found in his system to which he may have had an allergic reaction, the strain of his chronic conditions, and the underlying instability of a heart with HCM created a perfect storm. His heart's electrical rhythm simply went haywire, and it stopped beating effectively. Did Elvis know he had a family history of heart disease, and did it worry him? Could modern genetic screening have identified the HCM gene and allowed for preventative treatment, like beta blockers, that could have saved his life? And how much of his lethargy and poor stamina in later years was not just his weight, but an early symptom of a failing, genetically flawed heart? Number 2, was he missing a crucial protein? This might be the most important and fundamental medical fact of all, but one that could be the master key to unlocking the entire mystery of his poor health. Research strongly suggests that Elvis Presley had a genetic disease called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency A1AD. Alpha-1 antitrypsin is a protein that is made in the liver. Its main job is to protect the body's tissues from being damaged by inflammatory enzymes, particularly an enzyme called neutrophil elastase. This enzyme is released by our white blood cells to fight infection. The A1AT protein acts like a shield, protecting our own healthy cells from being destroyed by this powerful enzyme. If you have A1AD, your body doesn't produce enough of this protective protein. Without the shield, the enzyme runs rampant and starts attacking healthy tissue all over the body. It's like having an army with no off switch. This leads to chronic systemic inflammation and the slow destruction of various organs. The primary target is the lungs, leading to early onset emphysema, even in non-smokers. But it also attacks the liver, causing damage and cirrhosis, and we now know it can affect many other body systems. Look at the list of conditions associated with A1AD lung disease, liver disease, chronic pain, arthritis, colitis, inflammation of the colon, and paniculitis, a skin condition. It's a near-perfect match for Elvis's collection of seemingly unrelated health problems. This theory provides a biological basis for almost everything he suffered from. The autoimmune war in his body, it could have been this deficiency, which leads to a state of chronic self-inflicted damage. His lung problems, his liver damage, his colon issues, his chronic body pain all can be explained as consequences of this single genetic flaw. The evidence comes from his family history again. The multiple relatives on his mother's side who died young of lung and liver issues are classic signs of A1AD running in a family. Sally Hodell's book makes a powerful, well-researched case that both Elvis and his mother Gladys carried the genes for this disorder. Gladys's death at 46 was from a heart attack, but her liver was also failing, which her doctors at the time attributed to alcohol, though the family disputes this. It could very well have been the result of A1AD. If Elvis had this deficiency, he was fighting an uphill battle from birth. His body was fundamentally lacking a key protective mechanism. Every illness, every injury, every bit of stress would have caused an exaggerated inflammatory response that his body couldn't control. The bathtub fall in 1967 wouldn't have just been a concussion, it would have been a massive inflammatory event that his body had no tools to properly manage, potentially kickstarting years of problems. This is the unifying theory. It's the why. Why was he so sick? Why did he have so many different problems? He wasn't just unlucky. He wasn't just self-destructive. He was genetically compromised. Why was this never diagnosed? Because A1AD was, and still is, a widely under-recognized condition. It was first identified in 1963, and testing was not common in the 1970s. Doctors simply wouldn't have known to look for it. They saw the symptoms, but they couldn't see the root cause. Could this genetic flaw explain his body's inability to heal properly from injuries? How did the constant systemic inflammation from A1AD interact with the prescription drugs he was taking? And if this one single diagnosis had been made, could treatment with protein replacement therapy have stopped the destruction and given him a normal life? Number one, was it all just one big domino effect? When you look at the whole picture, Elvis Presley's death was not the result of one thing. It wasn't just the drugs, it wasn't just the cheeseburgers, it was a long, slow, catastrophic cascade of interconnected failures. It was a domino effect, and the first domino was tipped over before he was even born. Domino 1, his genetics. He was likely born with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency and a predisposition for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. His body lacked a key protein, and his heart was inherently flawed. He started the race of life with a huge handicap he never knew about. Domino 2, the death of his twin brother. This created a lifelong psychological wound, a sense of guilt and incompleteness that likely fueled self-destructive tendencies, and a chronic stress response that further weakened his body. Domino 3, the head trauma in 1967, this major physical shock in a body already primed for inflammation was the trigger. Likely activated his dormant health issues, starting the chronic pain, vertigo, and eye problems, and beginning his heavy reliance on prescription drugs to manage the symptoms. Domino 4, the prescription drug trap, the pills he took to manage the pain and insomnia from his underlying conditions began to cause new diseases. They destroyed his colon, damaged his liver, and masked the warning signs his body was giving him. The cure became a central part of the disease. Domino 5, the systemic breakdown. All these factors converged. His genetically flawed heart was forced to pump against high blood pressure. His toxin-filled blood from a failing colon overloaded his damaged liver. His body, ravaged by inflammation and lacking its natural defenses, was fighting a multi-front war. His sleep apnea starved his system of oxygen every night. Everything was connected. The colon problem made the liver problem worse. The liver problem made the drugs more toxic. The drugs made the sleep apnea more deadly. The sleep apnea put more strain on the heart. By August 16, 1977, his body was not just the body of a 42-year-old man. It was the body of a much older man, a man who had been through a prolonged, brutal war. Every system was compromised. It didn't take a massive overdose to kill him. It just took one final push, one more dose of a sedative that his body could no longer handle. The final domino fell. The simple story of rock and roll excess is a myth. The true story is a medical tragedy. It's a story of a man born with silent genetic flaws who suffered a cascade of illnesses, all while trying to live up to being the most famous person in the world. He wasn't a caricature. He was a profoundly sick man, trapped in a web of pain, pressure, and prescriptions. We judge the symptoms because for 50 years we never truly understood the disease. Could a single brilliant diagnostician in the early 1970s have put all the pieces together and seen the full picture? If he had been born 30 years later, could modern medicine, with its genetic testing and understanding of autoimmune disease, have saved him? And now that we know the truth, can we finally look back at the man in the jumpsuit not with pity or scorn, but with the compassion and understanding he was never given in his lifetime?